Have you ever imagined what you would do if you witnessed the unthinkable happening right before your eyes? A lonely man in the Wild West was about to make a decision that would change not just 2 lives, but an entire community condemned by drought. This is a true story of courage, sacrifice, and love that was born on the most arid plains of America. If you like emotional stories, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The wind carried more than just sand that March morning. It brought with it the weight of impossible decisions, the smell of desperation mixed with gunpowder, and the whisper of changes to come. The plains stretched out like a golden sea under the relentless sun, and on the horizon, where the land met the sky in a shimmering heat haze, Dry Creek Ranch stood like a stubborn mirage. It was one of those communities that sprouted along the tracks like mushrooms after rain, only to dry up and nearly vanish when fortune changed course. John Smith knew that dance between life and death that Western towns performed. He had seen many born and die in his 43 years, but something about that particular morning made his stomach clench like a wet rope in the sun. He adjusted his worn felt hat, feeling the sweat trickle down his temple as he guided his bay horse along the dusty paths leading to town. The animal snorted occasionally, as if sharing its owner's unease. John was known as a man of few words, one of those who preferred the company of silence to the chatter of saloons. His ranch was a half-hour ride from town, isolated enough to keep the curious away and close enough to get supplies when needed. That's how he liked it. Calculated distance, minimal involvement, guaranteed survival. But that morning a letter had arrived. It wasn't addressed to him specifically, but to the man at the Three Crosses Ranch, as some called him because of the 3 dead cottonwood trees that marked the entrance to his property. The messenger, a boy no older than 12 with a face burned by the sun, had galloped to his door before dawn, delivered the sweat-stained envelope, and left without waiting for a reply. The letter was brief, written in a shaky hand that betrayed despair. Auction today at noon, Town Square. Come prepared for the worst. John knew the sender. Mary Rodriguez was one of the few people in Dry Creek Ranch who still remembered when. He had arrived 15 years ago, carrying more scars on his soul than on his body. She had never asked about his past, never judged his choices of isolation. In return, he occasionally helped with repairs at her small boarding house, or brought water when the communal well ran dry. It was a silent agreement of mutual respect. And if Mary was asking for his presence, something truly serious was happening. Dry Creek Ranch's town square wasn't much more than an open space between sun-bleached wooden buildings. The Golden Nugget Saloon occupied one side, its swinging doors creaking in the wind. On the other, the Patterson Brothers General Store displayed its meager goods behind dusty windows. The small sheriff's office was squeezed between the barber and the undertaker, a proximity many considered appropriate, given the region's latent violence. And in the center of that irregular square of civilization, a small wooden platform had been hastily erected. John felt his stomach churn when he saw the crowd gathered. There weren't many, perhaps 30 or 40 people, but in a community of 200 souls, that represented a significant portion. Men with hats pulled low, women whispering behind makeshift fans, children clinging to their mothers' skirts, with wide eyes full of curiosity and fear. The air was heavy with that particular tension that precedes storms or tragedies, and John could taste the metallic tang of apprehension on his tongue. That's when he saw her. In the center of the platform, a small, fragile figure stood, shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. She couldn't have been more than 15 or 16, with black hair that fell like a curtain around her bowed face. She wore a simple white cotton dress that had seen better days, and her bare feet seemed too small to bear what was coming. Beside her, Thomas Brown, the most feared and hated man in Dry Creek Ranch, rubbed his greasy hands with ill-concealed satisfaction. Brown was what polite people called an entrepreneur and what honest people called a loan shark. He had arrived in town 5 years earlier, setting up with money of dubious origin, and quickly weaving a web of debts and favors that trapped half the population. When the drought began 3 years ago, many turned to him in desperation. The rates were extortionate, the terms cruel, But when the choice was between accepting or watching your family starve, few had the luxury of refusing. John dismounted slowly, tying the reins to a nearby post. His movements were deliberate, calculated, as his mind processed the scene. An auction, a girl. Brown's presence could only mean one thing, and bile rose in his throat at the thought of the implications. He had seen many cruelties in his life, participated in some that still haunted his sleepless nights, but this was different. It was the corruption of innocence, the selling of hope to despair. Mary Rodriguez materialized beside him, her face marked by wrinkles of worry even deeper than usual. "Thank God you came," she whispered, gripping his arm with fingers that trembled slightly. "It's the Rodriguez girl, Elena. The family owes Brown 3 years' interest, and with the drought." She didn't need to finish. John knew the cruel math of survival in the West. When there was nothing left to pawn, when the land was too dry to yield and the cattle died of thirst, few options remained. Her parents, he asked, though he suspected the answer. They ran off during the night, left the girl as payment. Mary's voice faltered on the last word, and John saw tears in the eyes of the strong woman who had survived 3 husbands and countless hardships. The sun climbed relentlessly in the sky, turning the square into a furnace. John could feel the sweat running down his back, sticking his cotton shirt to his skin. The desert had a particular way of amplifying human suffering, as if the land itself fed on misery. He watched Brown climb onto the platform, his obese body moving with the grace of a vulture approaching carrion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brown's oily voice cut through the crowd's murmur, "we are gathered here for a special auction. As you all know, I'm a man of business, and business is business. The Rodriguez family owes me a considerable sum, and since they ran off like the cowards they are, they left this collateral." Gestured towards Elena, who remained motionless as a salt statue. John noticed her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles white with tension. She held her chin slightly raised, a display of dignity that contrasted brutally with the degrading situation. "She's young, strong, can work in the house or in the fields," Brown continued, savoring each word as if it were a juicy piece of meat. "An excellent acquisition for anyone who knows how to profit." The way he pronounced the last word made John's blood boil. Around him he could feel the crowd's discomfort, but also resignation. This was the law of the West. The strong survived, the weak perished, and everyone did what was necessary to see another dawn. But there were limits, lines that shouldn't be crossed. And John felt that one of those lines was about to be obliterated in that dusty square. The first bid came from a rancher named Miller, known for working his hands to exhaustion. $50, he shouted, spitting on the ground immediately after. 60, countered another man John didn't recognize, probably a traveler passing through. The bids continued, rising slowly like the day's temperature. Elena remained still, but John, with the keen observation honed by years of living on constant alert, noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in her shoulders. Like a wild animal, the desert had taught him that true strength often hid behind a facade of fragility. The girl was fighting a fierce internal battle, and he wondered how much longer she could maintain her composure. It was when the bids reached $100 that something inside John snapped. Perhaps it was the way a sunbeam illuminated Elena's face, revealing dry trails of tears that had been shed and held back. Perhaps it was the memory of another girl, in another time and place, whom he had failed to protect. Or perhaps it was simply the recognition that, if he didn't act now, he would spend the rest of his days unable to look at his own reflection. $200. His voice cut through the air like the crack of a whip. All heads turned in his direction. John Smith, the hermit of the Three Crosses Ranch, the man who barely set foot in town unless absolutely necessary, was participating in the auction. The silence that followed was so deep, you could hear the wind whistling through the boards of the buildings. Brown narrowed his eyes, studying John like a snake assessing its prey. $200 from Mr. Smith, he announced, unable to completely hide the surprise in his voice. Anyone offer more? Miller looked about to raise the bid, but something in John's gaze made him reconsider. It was a look that spoke of contained storms, of dormant violence waiting for the slightest provocation to awaken. The years on the ranch had smoothed some edges, but they hadn't completely erased the man John had been before seeking refuge in those arid lands. 250, a new voice spoke up. It was William Taylor, owner of the largest herd in the region and a man known for his casual cruelty. He smiled at John, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. 300, John replied without hesitation. 350, 400. The auction had turned into a duel of wills. The crowd watched fascinated as the two men faced off through numbers, each bid a blow in a battle that transcended the merely financial. Taylor had money, much more than John, but there was something more at stake here than simple purchasing power. $500, Taylor practically spat the words. John felt the weight of the number. $500 was almost everything he had saved in years of solitary work. It was his safety net against the uncertainties of the future, his guarantee that he could survive another drought or cattle disease. Spending that amount would leave him vulnerable in a way he hadn't been since arriving at Dry Creek Ranch. He looked again at Elena. She had raised her head during the auction, and for the first time her eyes met his. They were brown eyes, the color of the earth after rain, and in them John saw not supplication but a silent question. It wasn't a plea for salvation, but a questioning of what kind of man he was, what kind of world they would allow to be built. $600, John heard his own voice say, as if from very far away. Taylor growled a curse but didn't raise the bid. Perhaps he realized John would go the distance, or perhaps he simply decided it wasn't worth the effort. Brown brought down the gavel with evident satisfaction, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent square. Sold to Mr. Smith for $600. May the good Lord bless this transaction. John walked to the platform with measured steps, taking the leather pouch from his vest's inner pocket. He counted the bills and coins methodically, each one representing months of deprivation and work. When he finished, Brown pushed Elena towards him with a dismissive gesture. "She's all yours, Smith. Make good use of her." John ignored the insinuation, extending his hand to help Elena down from the platform. She hesitated for a moment before accepting, her fingers cold and trembling against his calloused palm. Up close he could see she was even younger than he had imagined, with that translucent quality of youth that hadn't yet been completely hardened by life. "What's your full name?" he asked softly as he guided her away from the crowd that was beginning to disperse. "Elena Rodriguez," she replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Not anymore," John said, stopping beside his horse. "Elena died on that platform. You need a new start, a new name for a new life." She studied him with those wet, earth-colored eyes, and John saw in them a sharp intelligence that the desperate situation hadn't managed to extinguish. "And what name do you suggest, sir?" John thought for a moment, remembering a word he had learned years ago in another desert, from an old Apache elder who had saved his life. "Esperanza," he said finally. "It means hope. That's what we need. Now you and I, hope." Elena, or rather Esperanza, nodded slowly. "Esperanza," she repeated, testing the sound. "It's a good name." As he helped her mount his horse, John realized he had crossed a line from which there was no return. His solitary, carefully ordered life had been irrevocably altered, and he had no idea what the future held. But when he saw the first glimpse of something resembling relief on the girl's face, he knew he had made the right choice, whatever the cost. The ride back to the ranch was made in silence, except for the rhythmic clopping of the horse's hooves and the omnipresent whisper of the wind. John walked beside, holding the reins, allowing Esperanza to get used to the animal's sway. The sun was high now, turning the landscape into a furnace, and he could see the sweat glistening on her forehead. "It's not much," he said when the three crosses appeared on the horizon, "but it's safe." The ranch was indeed modest. A two-room main house, a barn that had seen better days, corrals for the cattle, and a well that, miraculously, hadn't completely dried up yet. John had built most of it with his own hands, each board and nail a declaration of independence and self-sufficiency. Helped her dismount and led her into the house. The interior was Spartan but clean, with functional furniture and few personal ornaments. One exception caught Esperanza's attention: a small shelf with half a dozen carved wooden figures, representing various desert animals. "Did you make these?" she asked, gently touching a miniature coyote. "Helps pass the time on long nights," John replied, surprised to feel a slight blush rising up his neck. "You can have the room. Sleep in the barn." "I can't take your bed." "It's not a suggestion," he interrupted, but softened his tone when he saw her flinch slightly. "You need to rest to recover. Tomorrow we'll start thinking about what comes next." While she timidly explored the small space, John prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. They ate in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that settles between two people who recognize having shared something significant, even if they couldn't yet articulate exactly what. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, John retreated to the barn as he had promised. Lying on a pile of hay, looking through the cracks in the boards at the first stars, he allowed himself to contemplate the magnitude of what he had done. $600. A girl who wasn't his responsibility. Complications he hadn't asked for or desired. But then he remembered her gaze, that mix of fear and stubborn hope, and knew he couldn't have acted otherwise. The desert had its own laws, cruel and relentless, but there was also room for small acts of redemption. Perhaps that was what he had been searching for all these years. Not isolation, but a chance to do something right, to balance the scales of his past mistakes. The first obstacle arose sooner than expected. The next morning, John was awakened by the sound of approaching hooves. Multiple horses, at least 3 or 4. He grabbed the rifle he kept always within reach and peeked through the barn door. William Taylor and 3 of his men had stopped in front of the house, their relaxed posture fooling no one familiar with violence. "Smith!" Taylor shouted. "I know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like civilized men." John checked the foe, rifle making sure it was loaded, before stepping out of the barn. He kept the weapon low but visible, a clear message that he was prepared for whatever came. "Taylor," he greeted dryly. "It's early for social calls." Taylor spat on the ground, the gesture loaded with contempt. "I came to make a proposal. I'll buy the girl from you, $1,000. It's almost double what you paid. She's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, Smith. It's just a matter of price." "I've already given my answer." Taylor leaned forward in the saddle, his eyes narrowing. "You know who I am, what I can do. Don't be stubborn. Take the money and avoid trouble." In response to the confrontation, the house door opened and Esperanza appeared. There was something different about her that morning, a subtle but significant change. Perhaps it was the way she held her shoulders straight or the direct gaze she cast at the mounted men. She had washed and changed the ragged dress for one of John's old shirts and a pair of pants he had hastily adjusted. The transformation was remarkable. "Are you all right, miss?" Taylor addressed her directly, ignoring John. "I can offer much. More comfortable accommodations than this place. I am where I chose to be," Esperanza replied, her voice clear, cutting through the morning air like a bird's song. The surprise on Taylor's face was almost comical. Clearly he hadn't expected her to speak, much less with such conviction. John felt an unexpected wave of pride. "You heard the lady," he said. "Now get off my property." For a tense moment it seemed Taylor might press the issue. His men subtly shifted position, hands nearing their weapons. But then something in the combination, John's unwavering resolve, Esperanza's unexpectedly strong presence, perhaps even the unfavorable terrain for a confrontation, made him reconsider. "This isn't over, Smith," he growled before turning, his horse around. "You'll regret getting involved in my business." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving John and Esperanza standing side by side, watching until they disappeared over the horizon. It was she who broke the silence. "He'll be back." "Probably," John agreed. "You shouldn't have spent so much money. I'm not worth it." John turned to face her, noticing for the first time that she had a small scar at the corner of her upper lip, almost imperceptible. "It wasn't about what you're worth. It was about what doing the right thing is worth. She seemed to ponder that for a moment. My parents, they weren't bad people, just desperate. Desperation makes people make terrible decisions, John said, thinking of his own past choices. It's not for us to judge them. You don't ask about my past. You don't ask about mine. A small smile appeared on her lips, the first he had, and it transformed her face completely, revealing the young woman she should have been under different circumstances. Seems fair. The following days established a cautious routine. John showed Esperanza the ranch chores, how to draw water from the well without wasting a drop, how to care for the skinny chickens that remained, how to read the signs in the sky to predict the weather. She learned quickly, her hands small but capable, her sharp mind absorbing every detail. It was during one of these lessons, while he was teaching her how to mend harnesses, that the second significant moment between them occurred. The afternoon sun filtered through the cracks in the barn, creating golden shafts of light where dust danced like tiny spirits. Esperanza was struggling with a particularly stubborn knot when John noticed silent tears streaming down her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, awkward with the display of emotion. "My father used to do this," she said, her voice thick. "He was a saddle maker before the drought. His hands were magic with leather. He said each piece had a soul, that our job was to set it free." John didn't know what to say, so he did the only thing that came to mind. He reached for the shelf above his head and took down a small figure he had finished the night before. It was a bird, wings spread in full flight, each detail meticulously carved. "Here," he said, placing it in her hands. "It's a peregrine falcon. They fly thousands of miles, always find their way home." Esperanza held the figure as if it were made of precious glass, tracing the delicate lines of the wings with the tip of her finger. "It's beautiful. Why are you giving me this?" "Because we all need something to remind us that we can fly, even when we feel trapped." She looked up at him, and for a moment the dusty barn seemed to contain the entire universe. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "You're welcome, Esperanza." It was the first time he had used her new name naturally, without thinking, and both of them noticed. A blush rose on her cheeks, and John felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he had buried so long he almost didn't recognize it. "Danger," his mind warned. "She is young, vulnerable, under your protection." But his heart, that treacherous organ, whispered other possibilities. The first real test came 2 weeks later, when the well began to show signs of drying up. John had noticed the gradual decrease in the water level, but had hoped it would last until the autumn rains. Now, looking into the dark bottom of the well with Esperanza beside him, the reality of the situation became inescapable. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "With strict rationing, maybe a month. Less if the cattle—" He didn't finish. Both knew what would happen to the cattle without water. "There must be another well, another source," she insisted. "The land can't be completely dry." John admired her optimism, even knowing it was likely unfounded. He had explored every acre of his property in the years he had lived there, searched for every sign of underground water. If there was another source, he would have found it. "We can buy water in town," he suggested, though he knew the prices would be exorbitant, and his savings, already drastically reduced, wouldn't last long. "Or," Esperanza said slowly, "we can seek help." "From whom? The people in town barely have enough for themselves." "Not from town, from the Indians." John stared at her, surprised. "Indians?" "My grandmother was half Apache," she revealed. "She used to tell me stories about how her people found water where no one else could, how they read the land in ways white men would never understand. There's a reservation 2 days' ride from here." It was risky. Relations between settlers and local tribes were tense at best, hostile at worst. But John had learned long ago that desperation sometimes required desperate measures. "Do you speak the language?" he asked. "A few words." "Enough, maybe." He considered the options. Staying meant slow death by thirst. Leaving meant leaving the ranch vulnerable to Taylor or other opportunists. But looking at Esperanza, Seeing the determination in her eyes, he knew what his choice would be. "We leave tomorrow at dawn," he decided. The journey to the reservation was a revelation in many ways. John had made solitary journeys before, but traveling with Esperanza brought a completely new dimension to the experience. She noticed things he had ignored. The way certain plants grew only near underground moisture, the flight patterns of birds that indicated distant water sources, the subtle changes in the color of the earth that suggested different mineral compositions. "My grandmother said the land speaks," she explained as they camped on the first night, the fire crackling between them. "We just need to learn to listen." "And what is the land saying now?" John asked, partly skeptical, partly genuinely curious. Esperanza closed her eyes, breathing deeply the desert night air. "It's saying change is coming. I can feel it in the wind." As if to confirm her words, a sudden breeze swept through the camp, making the flames dance wildly. John felt a shiver run down his spine, not from cold, but from premonition. The desert was like that, like a moody woman, its temper changing quickly and often without warning. They reached the reservation at noon on the second day. It was a desolate place, the few visible buildings showing clear signs of neglect and poverty. The people who watched them pass had faces marked by resignation, eyes that had seen too many promises broken. John let Esperanza take the lead, staying slightly behind as she approached a group of elders sitting in the shade of an adobe building. He didn't understand the words exchanged, a mix of Spanish, English, and Apache, but he could read the body language. Initially hostile, the elders gradually relaxed as Esperanza spoke, gesturing occasionally towards John. Finally, one of the oldest men, his face a map of deep wrinkles, rose and approached John. "You are the man who bought Singing Bird's granddaughter?" he asked in heavily accented English. John cast a surprised look at Esperanza, who seemed as shocked as he was. Yes, I paid for her freedom." The elder studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Come, we have much to discuss." What followed was one of the most surreal experiences of John's life. The elders, after confirming Esperanza's lineage through questions only someone with Apache blood could answer, revealed that her grandmother had been a respected figure in the tribe, known for her ability to find water. More than that, there was an ancient debt of honor involved. "Singing Bird's father saved my son from white men who wanted to hang him for a crime he didn't commit," the elder explained. "A life for a life. We will help you find water." The elder, who introduced himself as Joseph Red Cloud, insisted they stay the night on the reservation. That night, around a communal bonfire, John watched Esperanza interact with these people who were, in part, her people. She seemed more alive, more herself, laughing at stories told in a language he didn't understand, participating in songs echoing with centuries of tradition. It was during a break in the festivities that she sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body in the cool night air. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly. "It was your idea. But you trusted me. It means a lot." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. John was acutely aware of her closeness, the way the firelight played on her hair, creating reddish highlights in the deep black. It was the third significant moment between them, a moment of mutual understanding that needed no words. The next morning, Joseph Red Cloud and 2 other men accompanied them back to the ranch. They brought strange tools, willow rods, crystals on strings, bags of pungent herbs. John watched, fascinated despite his skepticism, as they methodically walked his property, stopping occasionally to confer with each other or make marks on the ground. It was Esperanza who noticed first. There, she pointed to where the men had converged near a rock formation John had always ignored. They found something. Joseph beckoned them closer. "Water," he said simply. "Not deep, perhaps 20-30 feet. But it is good water, water that will not dry easily." John could barely believe it, years of searching, and the answer had been there all along, hidden under rocks he had passed thousands of times. "How can we be sure?" In response, Joseph took a small folding shovel from his bag and began to dig. It didn't take long for the earth to change color, becoming darker, wetter. The smell of fresh water filled the air, and John felt his legs weaken with relief. "You will need to dig a proper—" "Well," Joseph explained, "hard work, but you two are strong. We can leave the tools, return in a moon to see the progress." As the men prepared to leave, Esperanza had a private conversation with Joseph. John saw the elder give her a small leather pouch, whispering instructions that made her eyes widen. When she returned to John's side, there was something different in her posture, a new layer of confidence or perhaps purpose. "What did he give you?" John asked after the visitors had departed. Esperanza opened the pouch carefully, revealing dark seeds he didn't recognize. "They are sacred seeds. He said I must plant them near the new water source, that they will bring protection and prosperity." "Do you believe that?" She looked at him with those wet, earth-colored eyes. "I believe there are more mysteries between heaven and earth than our wisdom can comprehend. And you, sir?" John thought of all the inexplicable moments in his life, the times when luck or fate or something greater had intervened. "I'm beginning to believe." The following weeks were filled with hard work. John and Esperanza worked side by side, digging the new well, their hands developing calluses upon calluses. It was brutal labor under the scorching sun, but there was a camaraderie in it, a shared sense of purpose that made the effort bearable. It was during a particularly hot afternoon, when both were covered in dirt and sweat, that the fourth crucial moment between them occurred. Esperanza had insisted on doing her full share of the work, refusing to accept any special treatment for being a woman. But the heat and the effort finally took their toll, and she stumbled, nearly falling into the partially dug hole. John caught her in his arms, pulling her to safety. For a moment, they stood like that, she leaning against his chest, both breathing heavily. He could feel her heart beating against his, fast as a startled bird's. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice huskier than he intended. "Yes," she whispered, but made no move to pull away. It was John who broke the contact, stepping back awkwardly. "We should rest. The sun is too strong." They sat in the sparse shade of a rock, sharing the water canteen. John was acutely aware of her every movement, the way she ran her tongue over her lips after drinking, the way a lock of hair had escaped her braid and stuck to her sweat-damp cheek. "Why do you live alone?" she asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "It's safer that way." "For whom?" He didn't answer immediately, wrestling with old demons the question had stirred up. Finally, deciding she deserved some truth, he said, "There was a woman once, and a child. I couldn't protect them." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unexpressed pain. Then Esperanza did something unexpected. She took his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. "It wasn't your fault," she said with absolute conviction. "You don't know what happened. I don't need to. I know you would have given your life to save them if you could." The simple words broke something inside John, a dam that had held back years of guilt and self-recrimination. He didn't cry. Men like him didn't cry, but he felt something shift internally, a weight he had carried so long he had forgotten what it was like to live without it. "Thank you," he managed to say. Esperanza squeezed his hand. "It's what we do for each other. It's what not being alone means." That evening, as they prepared the meal together, John found himself watching her in a new way, no longer as a responsibility or a girl who needed protection, but as a partner, someone who had chosen to stay and work beside him despite the hardships. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The big turning point in their growing closeness came a few weeks later, when they finally struck water. It was Esperanza who was at the bottom of the well when the shovel broke. Through the last layer of earth and water began to well up. Her cry of joy echoed off the well walls, and John hurried to hoist her up. She emerged soaked and covered in mud, but with the brightest smile he had ever seen. Without thinking, moved by the pure joy of the moment, she threw her arms around his neck, hugging him fiercely. John was frozen for a moment, then cautiously returned the embrace. "We did it," she laughed against his shoulder. John, we did it. It was the first time she'd used his first name, and the sound of it on her lips made something revolutionize in John's stomach. When she pulled back, there was a new awareness between them, a recognition that something fundamental had changed. The following days were spent consolidating their victory, building a proper structure around the well, installing a pulley system to make drawing water easier. The cattle, sensing the change, lowed with renewed energy. The chickens seemed to lay eggs with more enthusiasm. Even the land around seemed to breathe a little easier. It was during this period of cautious optimism that Taylor made his move. John had almost allowed himself to believe the man had given up, that the display of determination had been enough to deter him. He should have known better. Men like Taylor didn't give up. They just waited for the right moment to strike. The attack came at dusk, when the long shadows provided cover and the uncertain light made aiming difficult. John was in the barn, tending to a cut on one of the horse's legs, when he heard Esperanza scream. The sound cut through the air like a knife, full of a terror he had never heard in her voice. He grabbed his rifle and ran out, his heart pounding against his ribs. 3 men were in the yard, one of them holding Esperanza with his arm around her throat. Taylor was mounted on his horse, watching with cold satisfaction. "Let her go," John growled, raising his rifle. "Careful, Smith," Taylor warned. "My man's hand is shaky. It'd be a shame if something happened to the young lady because of a rash move on your part." John assessed the situation quickly. 3 men plus Taylor, all armed, Esperanza being used as a shield. The odds weren't good, but he had faced worse and survived. "What do you want, Taylor?" "Justice. You humiliated me, Smith, made me look weak in front of the town. That has a price." "Name your price then, but leave her out of it." Taylor pretended to consider. "The ranch. Sign everything over to me, and you 2 can walk away unharmed." John felt rage boil, but kept it in check. The ranch was everything he had built, his refuge, his home. But looking at Esperanza, seeing the fear in her eyes mixed with something that looked like trust in him, he knew there was no real choice. "All right," he said, lowering his rifle slightly. "I have the papers inside." "No," Esperanza managed to say despite the arm at her throat. "John, no." He met her eyes, trying to communicate what he couldn't say aloud. "Trust me." When he turned towards the house, he saw her understand, saw the subtle shift in her posture that told him she was ready. What happened next was a choreography of violence and desperation. As John reached the door, Esperanza moved, using a technique her grandmother must have taught her. She stomped hard on her captor's foot and threw her head back, breaking his nose. The moment he let go, she dropped to the ground, giving John a clear line of fire. The rifle thundered once, twice, 3 times. 2 men fell. The third managed to shield himself behind the water trough. Taylor, cursing, drew his own gun. But John was already moving, using the house for cover to circle around. The battle was brutal and brief. The remaining man tried to flank John, but Esperanza, showing remarkable presence of mind, threw a bucket of tools in his path, making him stumble. That gave John the opening he needed. When the dust settled, 3 men lay dead or dying in the yard. Taylor, realizing the tide had turned, tried to flee, but his horse, spooked by the shots, threw him off. He landed heavily, his ankle twisting at an unnatural angle. John approached him slowly, the rifle still smoking. For a moment he considered finishing the job. It would be easy, justifiable even. But then he felt Esperanza's hand on his arm. "No," she said softly. "He's not worth dirtying your soul for." Taylor looked at them with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes, it is," John replied. "You're going to leave here. You're going to go as far away as you can, and you're never coming back. Because if I see you again, there will be no mercy." They watched Taylor limp away, leaning on his horse. His men's bodies would be a problem for the sheriff. But John had witnesses that it had been self-defense. The West had its own laws, and defending your home and family was a sacred right. When they were finally alone, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving both of them trembling. Esperanza had a cut on her cheek where she had hit the ground, and John's hands trembled slightly. They sat together on the steps of the house, watching the sun set over the carnage in the yard. "You were willing to give up everything for me," Esperanza said after a long silence. "It would have been worth it to keep you safe." She turned to face him, and John saw tears in her eyes. "No one ever, my own parents." "Hey," he said softly, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "That's the past. You have a home now. You have what?" She whispered. The word caught in his throat. Family, partner, something more. Instead of speaking, he did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He leaned in and kissed her softly, almost chastely, but with all the feeling he couldn't express in words. When they separated, Esperanza was smiling through the tears. "I have this too," she said. "If you want it," John said, suddenly nervous as he hadn't been since his youth. "I want it," she replied simply. "I want everything. The hard work, the danger, the silent nights, the difficult mornings. I want to build something here with you, something that lasts." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained sitting together, shoulder to shoulder, contemplating the future. There would be challenges ahead, John knew. The drought wasn't over. Taylor might cause trouble in town, and life in the West was never easy. But for the first time in years, he wouldn't face these challenges alone. That night, after burying the dead and cleaning the yard, they planted the sacred seeds near the new well. Esperanza murmured words in Apache as John watched, feeling part of something larger than himself. The seeds disappeared into the dark earth, carrying promises of growth and renewal. "Do you think they'll grow?" he asked. "With water, sun, and care, anything can grow," Esperanza replied. "Even hearts that thought they were dead forever." She wasn't just talking about the seeds, and both of them knew it. John took her hand, interlacing their fingers with the ease of decades of practice. "Thank you," he said, "for saving me." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's how it works." The following months brought changes John could never have predicted. The sacred seeds sprouted, growing into resilient plants with fragrant white flowers that attracted bees from miles around. The new well proved even more abundant than Joseph had predicted, allowing them not just to survive, but to expand. News of the confrontation with Taylor spread, and with it came a grudging respect from the community. John Smith was no longer just the hermit of the Three Crosses Ranch. He was a man who defended what was his, who had rescued a girl from a terrible fate and given her a new beginning. People began to come seeking advice, help, sometimes just to share a meal and talk. Esperanza blossomed in this new social role. Her mixed heritage, once a source of shame, became a bridge between the white and native communities. She began teaching the town's children about medicinal plants, passing on the knowledge her grandmother had preserved. The women, initially suspicious, gradually accepted her, especially after she helped deliver the blacksmith's wife's difficult baby, using traditional techniques. The fifth decisive moment in their relationship came during the first autumn rains. They were working to reinforce the barn roof when the clouds, which had been building promisingly for days, finally broke open. Rain fell in torrents, turning the dry earth into mud in minutes. Instead of running for shelter, Esperanza threw her head back and laughed, opening her arms to embrace the storm. John watched her, captivated by the pure joy on her face, the way the water made her hair stick to her neck, the absolute freedom of her laughter. "Come!" she shouted over the noise of the rain. "John, come dance!" He hesitated. Old habits of caution died hard, but then she took his hands and pulled him into the rain. They danced there in the muddy yard, with no music except the drumming of the rain on the zinc roof, spinning and laughing like children. It was in that moment, with the water washing away the blood and dust and the weight of difficult years, that John knew with absolute certainty that he loved her. Not as a protected one or a responsibility, not as a convenient companion to share the work, but as the other half of his soul, the part he didn't even know was missing until she appeared. "I love you," he said, the words lost in the noise of the storm. But Esperanza heard, or perhaps read his lips, or simply knew. As people sometimes know these things, she stopped dancing, stood on tiptoe and kissed him with all the passion and promise of her youth, with all the hard-won wisdom of their shared trials. "I love you too," she said when they separated. "From the moment you gave me a new name. You gave me more than a name, John. You gave me a life." The rain continued for 3 days, filling not just their new well, but creating puddles and temporary streams all over the property. The cattle drank eagerly, the chickens scratched happily in the mud, and the sacred plants seemed to grow inches every hour. It was during these rainy days, trapped inside the house by the storm, that they truly became a couple. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives before they met. John told her about his wife and daughter, killed by bandits while he was away selling cattle, about the years of seeking revenge that followed, about how he had come to Dry Creek Ranch empty and broken, looking only for a place to wait for death, in peace. Esperanza shared her own pains, a childhood marked by poverty and prejudice, the slow decline of her family as the drought tightened its grip, the final betrayal when her parents left her behind. But she also spoke of moments of beauty, her grandmother teaching her the old ways, the feeling of freedom riding across the plains, the dreams she kept alive even in the darkest moments. "You know what's strange?" she said one night, as they lay together listening to the rain drumming on the roof. "I'm grateful for everything that happened, all the suffering, all the pain, because it brought me here to you." The desert, like a wounded heart, guarded its waters jealously until love found a way to make it bloom again. John understood then that Esperanza had been his rain, the force that had broken the drought of his soul. "Will you marry me?" he asked impulsively. Esperanza propped herself up on an elbow to look at him. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life." "Then yes," she said simply. 1,000 times yes. They married a month later, in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Mary Rodriguez officiated. She had discovered she had the authority to do so in some old book of territorial laws. Joseph Red Cloud came to represent Esperanza's Apache side, bringing blessings and traditional gifts. Even some of the town's more reclusive residents showed up, curious to see the hermit Smith actually get married. Esperanza wore a simple white cotton dress Mary had helped sew, with desert flowers braided into her hair. John had trimmed his beard and put on the only suit he owned, kept for years at the bottom of a chest. They exchanged simple vows, promises to work together, protect each other, build something lasting on that difficult land. The reception was modest, but joyful. Someone brought a violin and there was dancing late into the night. The new well provided enough water for everyone, and people commented in wonder how the Three Crosses Ranch had transformed from a place of isolation into a center of community. But the real magic happened after the guests had left. John and Esperanza stood alone under the vast starry sky, the Milky Way stretching above them like a river of light. They had built a life together, forged in the heat of the desert and tempered by trials, and now they had the rest of their lives to perfect. "The regrets?" John asked as they gazed at their land. "Never," Esperanza replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "This is my home. You are my home." The challenges continued, of course. The West was no place for easy, happy endings. There were years of drought and years of flood, locust plagues and disease outbreaks. Taylor, true to his word, never returned. But other ambitious men tried to take advantage of what they saw as weakness, an older man married to such a young woman. But John and Esperanza faced every challenge together. When cattle rustlers tried to steal their herd, she rode beside him in pursuit, shooting with the accuracy he had taught her. When fever struck the town, she nursed the sick with traditional remedies, while he rode for days to fetch a doctor. When their first child was born, a boy they named Michael, they raised him with the values of both cultures, teaching him that strength came not from hardness, but from resilience, not from isolation, but from community. The ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams. The well they had dug with Joseph's help proved to be part of a vast underground aquifer, providing water, even during the worst droughts. The sacred plants grew into a small grove, their deep roots stabilizing the soil and their flowers attracting pollinators that helped other plants grow. Other settlers, seeing their success, came for advice. John, overcoming his natural reluctance, shared what he had learned about working with the land instead of against it. Esperanza taught the women about medicinal plants and water conservation techniques. Together, they helped transform Dry Creek Ranch from a dying town into a thriving community. Years later, sitting on the porch they had built on the now expanded house, John watched Esperanza teach their grandson, the fourth generation now, about the stars. She was still beautiful to him, though time had silvered her hair and marked her face with lines of laughter. The hands that held the boy's small hands were calloused from work, but gentle with wisdom. "Grandpa," the boy asked, "is it true you bought Grandma at an auction?" John and Esperanza exchanged a look, decades of shared history passing between them in an instant. How to explain to a child born into prosperity the harshness of those early days? How to convey the lessons learned through suffering without inflicting that suffering? "It is true that I paid money to secure your grandmother's freedom," John said carefully. "But what really happened was that she saved me. She taught me that a man alone is like a dry well with no purpose and no life. It was she who brought the water back to my life." The boy seemed to consider this with the seriousness only the very young can show. "Like the water you found on the ranch?" "Exactly like that water," Esperanza said, kissing the top of her grandson's head. "Sometimes the most precious things are hidden right beneath our feet. We just need the right help to find them." Later, after the boy had gone to sleep, John and Esperanza sat together as they had done so many times over the years, watching the sun set over their land. The three crosses still marked the entrance, but now they were surrounded by living trees nourished by the well that never ran dry. "Worth it?" Esperanza asked, a ritual question between them. "Every cent," John replied, as he always did. "Every tear, every drop of sweat, every moment of fear. It was all worth it to get here, to this moment, with you." She took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think my grandmother was right. The land speaks, and you know what it's saying now?" John smiled, pulling her closer. "What is it saying?" "It's saying, 'Welcome home.'" And it was true. What had begun as a desperate act of purchase, a transaction born of cruelty and despair, had transformed into something sacred. Two lost souls had found each other in the most unlikely place, under the most unlikely circumstances, and had created not just a home, but a legacy. The night wrapped around them gently, but they were not afraid. They had faced the worst the world could offer and had prevailed. Together they had transformed a dying ranch into an oasis, a broken girl into a strong woman, a bitter man into a loving husband. They had taken a new name, Esperanza, and had made it a self-fulfilling prophecy. And somewhere on the plains where the wind still carries stories of courage and love, the echo of their names remains, reminding all who pass that miraculous new beginnings can sprout from the most improbable endings. That in the vast and harsh West, under the relentless sun and the infinite sky, two lonely hearts found in each other the home they had always sought. And you, when will you let hope bloom? In your desert,